is governing them at particular times. But in 1721, all licensed taverns within the state or the province of New Hampshire had to be constantly be provided with beer or cider for the refreshment of travelers, under penalty of paying 10 shillings for every defect, so often as they shall be found 2 days without it. Had to have liquor. Because remember, drinking water could be dangerous, they thought. Here in the New World, not so much. But coming from where they had and the understanding that they had, you had to have liquor. If a public house keeper refused to receive a traveler as a guest into his house or to find him victuals or lodging upon him rendering a reasonable price for the same, he is not only liable to render damages, but may be indicted and fined at the suit of the state. So you also had to have not only the drink, but you had to have food and lodging for travelers as well.
Now,
lodging as well.
It's often just one room.
It often is just one room, and you might have 5 people in a bed, and bed bugs would be joining you. Yeah, it could be pretty common.
I'm glad I was born now.
Me too. There's a tavern over in Portsmouth that I was studying, and it was full of bolsters, tons and tons of bolsters. But these were the kinds that were rolled up, and in the evening could be unrolled. So it's also a place that the provincial government was meeting. So imagine, the New Hampshire State House full of beds, rolled up beds, and that's how they did it. So they could have lodging in any room of the house as well. In 1716, there was a law that forbade tavern keepers to serve any apprentice, servant, or Negro without permission of the master. No local inhabitant was to sit drinking or tippling after 10 at night, or to continue there above the space of 2 hours. Are the laws you were to follow. Okay, so we talked about the statutes as they applied to women. And let's look at the statutes required of licensed tavern keepers. So you had to provide food and drink that we just talked about. You had to provide beds for travelers, lodging also for horses, oxen, whatever you rode in on, in other words. You had to post the list that we talked about. I mean, these were required. These are requirements that the government required. You had to pay excise taxes on the liquor. It was really important, by the way. Even back then, it covered half the expense of the provincial government. Some things don't change. You had to control the drinking time, as you just saw in that 1716 law, and that law you'll see repeated a number of times. You had to keep the Sabbath Laws. Okay, so the Sabbath Laws, a little flexible over time. They were open on Sabbath because it was a warm place. Sometimes you were allowed to serve liquor. Sometimes you were not. It appears they almost always did. But there are a variety of different Sabbath laws, and so they could vary from time to time. You had to keep good orders. So if one tavern license I read that was the mother had just died and the son was inheriting the tavern, and they said that the tavern can go to this individual because his mother had kept good orders. It's the only time I've seen, by the way, a tavern license refer to the previous tavern owner as the reason the next one's getting it, which I just keep wondering, what happened next? What happened next? So she had to keep, or he had to keep, good orders within their tavern. And they also had to market their business. Now, that's not a legal requirement, but if they didn't market it, they wouldn't end up with that wonderful estate like Love Chase was in charge of. They also had to buy and sell. You needed the food, you needed the drink, you needed to keep the linens. The linens were a huge expense during this time. So you need to keep those things up to date. You need to hire people. If you ran a particularly large tavern, you might need several individuals helping you in the tavern. So there's a lot of things that were happening in the tavern. And then there were customary things that happened within taverns. You provided accommodations for the town and the business, as clearly Love Chase's tavern was doing for Stratham. There were domestic duties that happened on a regular basis, so the cleaning that goes along with it, making sure that the outhouse is up to snuff, making sure you've got the food, such as it might have been, making sure there's drink, making sure that things are clean enough. Their standards of cleanliness were not quite ours. They also were sources of news, and that was something that was expected. If you went into a tavern and they did not have a newspaper or something to read or listen to, you weren't going to stay in business very long. They also had to accommodate meetings, but also music. They might have music there, they might have lectures. I could actually see that happening in the Kenniston Tavern. I can imagine that ceiling would be great for music. They might have had dances as well. This is before the Victorian period, so there were dances. So there were a lot of things that would happen within a tavern. And again, remember, it was a public trust according to custom. Hello. There. And then, so the public house, my point here, the public house was truly public. It was a highly regulated business. It involved market forces and state authority. And there we go. Thank you very much.
Sense from all that Marcia's been saying how remarkable Chase's Tavern is, and it's quite amazing that we still have it with us here today. I just want to exit the whole Chase Tavern thing, reading from Richard Scammond's account of the Chase's Tavern. He said, "There was never a more genial landlord than Major Dudley Chase. He was the son of Love Chase, who took over after her, although I think they probably sort of overlapped. I know they overlapped, but her son, Major Dudley Chase, was fond of music and played the flute with skill. He had roughed it about the world as a sailor. He had ardently embraced the cause of the Revolution. He entered the service as a company fifer and had come out of the retreat from Ticonderoga in a somewhat dilapidated condition. He managed to pull himself together after that, and he rose through the ranks of the Continental Army, finally leaving the Army in 1780. He died in 1815. However, this is kind of a mystery. In 1802, Love Chase's will left the property to her grandson Andrew, Dudley's son. So we don't really know quite what was going on there. Maybe Dudley was getting a little dilapidated. I don't know. But anyway, in 1829, Andrew Chase sold the property to Joseph and Sophronia Emery. And here we begin the saga of the Emery family at this property. And this is the fireplace in the front left room, which was probably the bar room when it was run as a tavern. But you can see it's been converted now to have a stove, and you can also see that to the side there, the oven had in the 1840s acquired a cast iron door, and these are seen in many houses here in Stratham. These were cast at a foundry in what was called South Newmarket, which is Newfields. And then going through the front hall, you can see some changes that were made in the Emery period, in the more federal period. And in the other front room on the other side of the house, a very federal style mantelpiece. Although the hearth and the shape of the actual firebox is probably more 18th century there. And the ceiling of this room has the same kind, it has the sort of beams and moldings that would have been of the earlier era. So they just kind of gussied up the mantelpiece, but left the rest of the room pretty much. This was probably a meeting room. It kind of goes from the front to the back of the house. And going upstairs, we come to a room that's kind of the equivalent of that lovely room at the Kenniston Tavern with that beautiful cove ceiling. This room has on its south wall a lot of paneling and doors and so forth, and again, it goes front to back. So with this degree of paneling, it probably was also used as sort of a meeting room or a public room for that sort of activity. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, this is a very boring slide, I'm sorry, but it actually is kind of interesting because it's not quite symmetrical there, but, so I really want to get an architect or somebody who's done that to have a look at that and see what's going on. But the Emery Farm is worth mentioning here. John Emery began market gardening on this property in 1850. He was reportedly the first in Stratham to undertake that kind of farming, market gardening in a modern fashion. He was famous for strawberries in particular, and his son, J. Fred Emery, took over the business, and he moved into the old homestead on his wedding day in 1896. And in 1919, he began his roadside farm stand, which was reportedly the first in our area, and I'm sure many of you remember Fred Emery and his farm stand. And he was known as what I would call an old codger. He was a very colorful character, and particularly known for versifying on any occasion. But on his younger years, he was very active in politics, and he started out, one of his first jobs was being janitor when they built the town hall across the way, but he went on to become a selectman, being in this House of Representatives and so forth. And he was in fact a selectman at the time when the town accepted the gift of Stratham Hill, which becomes Stratham Hill Park. But Richard Scammon, writing in 1899, noted the passing of taverns. The railroad had come, for one thing. Public convenience no longer required the roadside tavern. Adverse public sentiments suppressed the bar, and neither has since existed in the town. But that was not quite true. Hospitality in a different form could still be found in Stratham. This is a picture of a inn, hotel, whatever, called the Elms. It was also called Elmwood. This photo, we believe, is dated from the 1880s. And it was known for providing country stays to people who would come for the waters. There was a sulfurous well behind here, and they actually sold it in big stoneware jugs, and you could take it away with you. You could stay there and drink it. But this is so interesting because you see these people, guests arrayed on the upper and lower porches, and gentlemen about to head off in this nice little buggy. And I love over on the left-hand side, bottom, there's a woman in a shirtwaist with a tie and a long skirt about to head off on her bicycle, which on those dusty roads must have been quite an adventure. And Ron mentioned the Portsmouth Avenue was paved with concrete in 1929. And it's about that time that True Roby took advantage of this new modern road to set up Roby's Cabins. And these were where Stratham Hill Stone is today. Little, what you kind of think of as a motor court kind of thing. I love the little sort of windmill or lighthouse feature there. And they're advertising that they were clean, wholesome, and up to date. Of course, as Marcia mentioned, the early taverns were required to provide for their guests horses or other livestock, not only what you might have rode in on or had hitched up to your wagon, but I imagine also people were driving livestock from towns like Stratham up to the market square in Portsmouth. So if you were stopped and you had, if you steer with you, you expected them to be able to be fed and watered at the tavern. But we get into the 20th century, people didn't need hay and water, they needed gasoline. And this is one of the first gas stations located where a gas station was recently removed, sort of next to the CVS there. And it was run by Arthur and Ida LaViolette from circa 1935 till, I looked in the town directories and they were still listed there through the 1950s, so maybe some of you could tell us.
We said LaViolette.
LaViolette, okay, all right, thank you. And then finally, we see.
Remember, it was fill it up and put a quart of oil in.
Oh yeah, right. Everybody was burning oil. This is a photo that appeared in a kind of economic development brochure sometime in the early 1950s, and it says Sunset Farm, a pleasant farm boarding house on Winnicott Road. This is the Nathaniel Wiggin House, which is at 58 Winnicott Road, just down this way. And this is a way, as farm stays became popular in New Hampshire, both before and after World War II. And it was a way for farms to add, make some money, add value to a farm. This was at a time when market gardening in Stratham and elsewhere in New England was beginning to decline. So you had people living on farms that weren't producing quite as much income, or that farmers had become elderly. This was one way that they could continue to keep operating. And finally, I'd like to say, after you've heard about all these wonderful taverns, perhaps you feel somewhat like envious of our forebears that had places to gather for conviviality, to conduct business, to discuss the affairs of the day, and to create community. I hope that somehow, sometime in our near future, Stratham can develop places where residents and visitors to Stratham can meet as strangers and leave as friends and neighbors.
The man that is drunk is void of all care. La 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 la. The moor's poisoned dart he scorns for to wield. His bottle alone is his sword and his shield. La 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 la.